Ukraine's President Zelensky has addressed the UN General Assembly and called for countries to work together to force Russia to stop its war. Earlier, the Kremlin dismissed remarks by President Trump suggesting Kyiv can win back its territory taken by Russia. And a small child is among a family of 3 to be the first people to arrive in the UK under the one-in, one-out deal with France. 4 migrants have been returned to Calais as part of the agreement designed to stop small boat crossings. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 27 at 92.50. The pound buys $1.34 and a euro 14. LBC weather. A clear and dry evening for most. Some patchy fog in the north and in the west will develop later on, with lows of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Dominic Ellis.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. As Russia seeks to widen the Ukraine war to destabilise and provoke other European countries, this is a dangerous moment for all of us. Donald Trump says NATO countries should shoot down Russian jets over their airspace. Meanwhile, he's changed his mind and said Ukraine could win, could take back all of its territory and maybe even more and beat Russia. That might warm Ukrainian hearts. But let's be careful. Is this Trump's way of saying, tried to stop war, failed to stop war? So good luck, Kyiv, and over to you, Europe. If so, what does that mean for us? And by the way, in a military sense, who really speaks for Europe these days? Last night, I brought you a clip of the Polish Foreign Minister, Radek Sikorski, giving this warning to Moscow at the United Nations.
We are peaceful democracies who have studiously avoided actively joining your attempt to reconquer Ukraine. But we will not be intimidated. I have only one request to the Russian government. If another missile or aircraft enters our space without permission, deliberately or by mistake, and gets shot down and the wreckage falls on NATO territory, please don't come here to whine about it. You have been warned.
And then, after President Trump suggested Russian jets flying into territory should be shot down, Sikorski laconically replied, "Roger that." So if there's one person I really wanted to hear from today, it's him. I had one simple question first. Mr. Sikorski, can I start off by asking for clarity? If, from now on, a Russian jet flies into Polish airspace, it will be shot down?
Well, let's start with what happened some 10 days ago. 21 Russian drones, we think, were deliberately targeted at Poland. They were launched from a separate location from the drones going at Ukraine. They were unarmed, all of them, which means that it wasn't a spin-off of the Ukrainian bombing, that it was a separate operation. And they were fought against for 7 hours. So this was a way of testing our defenses, our political system, and our alliance. We think of it as part of the spectrum of provocations, from assassinations like in Britain, through arsons, through information war, through DDoS attacks that Russia is waging against Europe.
I suppose the crucial question is whether these are kind of random provocations just to see how we respond and to put us off balance, as it were, or the very first steps towards a wider European war.
I think they are probing our responses, see where we draw the line in the sand. And, you know, every country has the right to protect its sea and its airspace, and there are procedures for that. When an armed aircraft is not following the orders of ground control or is not following the orders of aircraft that have intercepted it, there is, needless to say, a final procedure to protect the people and the property on the ground.
Have you any doubt at all that the drones appearing over Copenhagen Airport, over Oslo Airport, over North Germany and so on were also part of this Russian provocation, this kind of finger jabbing going on?
I have not yet been properly militarily briefed on this, so I won't say, but I wouldn't be surprised.
You said directly to Moscow from the United Nations earlier in the week, you have been warned, and you suggested that Russian jets, if they were shot down, the Russians shouldn't come and whine about that. Do you think we are quite close to a moment when one NATO country or another actually has to shoot down a Russian jet?
Well, note that we are not doing it to Russia. Have you heard of any incidents of Western aircraft breaching Russian airspace? No,
none at all. None at all. Mm-hmm.
Right. And if it were happening by accident, there are procedures for that too. You know, the Polish and other allied Air Force centers are actually connected to Russian ones. They can say, guys, sorry, pilot error, it won't happen again, apologize. And that's fine. And it's happened before, and we understand that. But every country's constitution of a sovereign country says that the army has a duty to protect its territory, also in the air, and we will do what's necessary.
So I come back to taking all of that. I come back to my original question. Do you think we are quite close, the way the Russians are behaving at the moment, to that kind of incident?
Well, we don't seek it, but it's the Russians who are probing our airspace. And as you know, they fly hostile missions around British Isles. Their ships are conducting surveillance, and perhaps these drone launches in the Danish Straits are a part of that. It is Russia that is invading its neighbors, not us.
So do you think this is the very first steps towards a wider war? Do you fear that?
Well, I hope not, but we don't control that. It's Vladimir Putin who is unhappy with the borders of Russia and wants to enlarge them.
The former Foreign Ministry of Lithuania, Mr. Landsbergis, has suggested that in future, when drones enter NATO or Western airspace and cause trouble, they should be responded to by cruise missile strikes on the sites the drones were launched from. Do you think that's going too far?
First of all, the one thing that these drone operations have exposed is our gap in our defenses. You know, the happiest way of dealing with drones is to jam their communications, their orientation. And 80% of Ukrainian defenses do that. And so we need to develop this capacity on NATO's eastern flank. My preferred response, and this is what Ukraine has actually asked for, is that we should intercept drones and cruise missiles over Ukrainian territory before they threaten doing damage to lives and property on over NATO territory.
And Ukraine has just passed a law which would allow Ukrainian troops and service people to work inside Poland with the Polish military on joint exercises on air defense. Is that going to happen?
Oh no, we do this all the time. We have Ukrainian volunteers, and we have, in fact, in my hometown of Bydgoszcz, a NATO institution called JTEC, Joint Analysis and Training Center, where Ukrainian soldiers pass on their experience of fighting Russia to NATO comrades.
Let me ask you a sort of slightly wider question then, which is, you'll have heard Donald Trump earlier on saying that he thought actually Ukraine could win this war against Russia, could take back all of its territory, but it was really very much for the Europeans to help them. This could be either Donald Trump saying, do you know what, I've tried to bring a peace, I've failed to bring a peace, over to you, Europe, or it could be something more heartening for Ukraine. How do you read what he's saying, and what do you think Europe should be reacting? How do you think Europe should be reacting?
He must be hearing what I heard in Kiev 10 days ago. Ukrainians are remarkably confident. These strikes against military targets, namely Russian refineries, are being very successful, and they are done with Ukraine's indigenous long-range drones and and apparently possibly also ballistic missiles. And if Ukraine could deprive Putin's army of petrol for his tanks and for his trucks, then I think we would have a different situation. The Russian offensive seems to have petered out, very small gains of territory at huge losses. Russian economy is suffering. So perhaps Putin might recalculate, and only then do we have a chance for peace.
I mean, he's losing more troops on the front line than he's able to recruit right at the moment. So it could be that there is also a manpower issue there for the Russian army.
And remember, the recruitment is at a huge cost because he's not actually using recruits. He's using contract soldiers, and he's running out of money in Russia's reserve fund.
Taking all of that into account, if it's the case that effectively Trump is saying to Western Europe, do you know what, it's over to you now, do we have the military power, do we have the confidence, do we have the political confidence to actually step in and win the war with Ukraine?
President Trump has told us this in no uncertain terms. And as you know, there is no new package of assistance to Ukraine. The remaining American weapons deliveries are from the Biden-era package. But the U.S. is still helpful with targeting information. The Starlinks are useful. Actually, Poland pays for 25,000 Starlink terminals that serve the Ukrainian army. So, yes, U.S. influence on this war is less and less, and Europe's more and more. We not only pay for the majority of the functions of the Ukrainian state, we also pay for the majority of military assistance. Ukraine is well provided for till the end of the year. It's planning to be capable of fighting for another 3 years. And if we seize the frozen Russian assets, which I think we should, then Ukraine can continue to resist for 3 years. And in that perspective, I think the Russian economy will be in even bigger trouble.
Meanwhile, Poland has built up your military very, very substantially in recent years. Germany is spending a lot more money. Do you think, from what you've seen and heard, that Britain is doing enough?
Oh, yeah. Britain is at the forefront of lessons learned in Ukraine. But yes, Poland, we've given Ukraine more tanks than all of Western Europe put together, and we still have more tanks than all of Western Europe put together. We take our security very seriously. We've been invaded and occupied by the Russians many times over the last 500 years. When they threaten us, we take it seriously.
Final question. Donald Trump was pretty withering about Europe and mass immigration, changing European societies in his speech to the United Nations. You have a very long European border. What's your perspective on the migration threat to Western Europe at the moment?
Well, we've built a big and beautiful fence on the 440 kilometers of our border with Belarus. It's cost us €500 million. It has sensors underground, cameras overground. We have extra border guards, extra riot police. We have denied asylum seeker the right to ask for it on our side of the border. We deport the couriers who help these people, traffickers. So we are generous to genuine Ukrainian war refugees, but we will not be victims of Belarusian and Russian hybrid war against our border. We believe that if the Schengen zone is to work internally, and it's a great boon to our citizens, the perimeter of Schengen, the external border of the EU, has to be solid and protected.
And so, therefore, Donald Trump's advice to Europe was actually helpful and well meant in your view.
Well, we all look at these dramatic pictures of what happens in the Mediterranean, for example, and the actual majority of migration happens through people overstaying visas or people rejoining families or people coming legally. So the control of migration is actually your philosophy of tolerating people who've already arrived.
Radek Sikorski, the next time you're in London, I hope you pop in to see us. But for now, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
And now for some analysis back home. We're going to hear from Mark Urban, the renowned diplomatic journalist, military journalist, and also presenter of the global podcast, The Crisis Room. Mark, welcome. Radek Sikorski being quite cautious there about actually when and if NATO would shoot down Russian jets. But this is a dangerous moment.
It is, and this week they've actually had meetings in NATO, the Supreme Allied Commander, various other people, trying to work out, do we need to adjust our rules of engagement? Now, those talk about hostile acts. If you come into someone else's country and bomb them, it's obviously a hostile act. But then there's this greyer area, hostile intent.
If you buzz their airports and close them down, that's not friendly.
No, it's not. It's not. Of course, it's something that's been happening at Russian airports, done by the Ukrainians. And of course, I think what the Russians are trying to do here is create a kind of equivalence.
See how you like it.
Yeah, a sort of equivalence. And a response.
What about the wider politics of all of this? President Trump suddenly surprising everybody by saying, do you know what, I think Ukraine can win this war and get all of its territory back. And Radek Sikorski there being quite positive about how well Ukraine is doing. Are we being a little bit over-optimistic?
Possibly, yes. I mean, look, that Trump Truth Social post yesterday that got everyone talking, to give you some measure of my scepticism, I didn't even tweet about it. So even a sort of free form of social media commentary, I didn't indulge in. For I think there were three parts to it. You know, Russia is in trouble. Well, he has said that before economically. He said it a few times, actually. Ukraine can get all its land back. Well, I'm afraid for people who support Ukraine, I just don't think that's true. The reality of the war for the last couple of years has been that they can't. And Europe is welcome to buy lots of weapons from us to give to Ukraine, which is also consistent with previous statements. So I'm not so sure that it marks a big turning point. With regard to the situation on the front, it's very difficult. Both sides are really stretched. The Ukrainians have something around 10 to 12 soldiers per kilometre of front. So if the Russians take out some positions, they can infiltrate through. That's what's been going on recently. So far, the Ukrainians have successfully mopped them up, but the whole thing is becoming very porous. And I guess that does create the possibility for some sudden changes. But it's so hard these days, with all these drones and other means of detecting an enemy, it's so hard to gain an advantage and exploit it. People can see you coming miles off.
I suppose in the end that means it's all about who's got the greater political and diplomatic willpower to keep going. And Putin's calculation is that we in the West will quite soon get bored.
Yeah, sustainment, and that's money, weapons and people. The Russians have been pretty successful at sustaining on the weapons. They've really ramped up production. And production of everything from shells to drones has come up in European countries, but quite slowly by comparison. That's created a problem. Another problem for the Ukrainians is sustaining people. Obviously, they've got a population that's much smaller than Russia's. Both countries, though, like to rely on kind of voluntary enlistment. The Ukrainians have increased the conscription a bit, but units are really, really under strength. So, you know, that's Putin's gamble. He's sticking with it. We'll see whether Trump does some more concrete things to try and bring Putin to a different position.
Mark, it's always a pleasure to have you in the studio. Thanks very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
Now, up next, after Nigel Farage made some astonishing claims on LBC this morning, we'll be asking, does the truth really matter anymore? You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr. Time now 6:19.
This is LBC. This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 60 60 973.
Right, this truth thing. Does it matter now that we live in parallel worlds in which anything can be possible? If I tell you, for instance, that rubbing old coffee grounds into your face raises your IQ by 40 points, or that never ever changing your socks means that you will avoid dementia in later life, or that migrant pansexuals are wandering around city centres right now, as you're listening to me, biting the heads off our native pigeons just for fun. Does it matter if you, being perhaps a knucklehead, believe me? These outrageous thoughts are provoked, of course, by President Trump publicising a link between autism in children and pregnant women using paracetamol, or Tylenol as they call it there. Oh yes, and Nigel Farage's allegation, denied by the royal parks, that migrants are charging about our green and pleasant places, eating our swans. Now, at this point, I have to engage in an awkward and possibly dangerous personal manoeuvre. As a middle-of-the-road, moderate, let's-all-be-chums kind of guy, I have to interpose my body between those of my LBC colleagues Ian Dale and Nick Ferrari. Let me explain. Here is Dr. David Boole, president of the Reform Party, with Ian Dale.
Obviously, there is no link between paracetamol and autism, full stop.
And here is Nigel Farage, leader of the same party, challenged by Nick on the same issue this very morning.
I wouldn't follow what Mr. Kennedy's department does. I'd listen to what they have to say, but I wouldn't follow it. And frankly, nor would I follow the World Health Organization.
When Donald Trump talks about links between paracetamol or Tylenol and autism, is he right?
I have no idea.
You think he might be right?
I have no idea. You know, we were told thalidomide was a very safe drug, and it wasn't. Who knows? Nick, I don't know. You don't know. He has a particular thing about autism, I think because there's been some in his family, and he feels it very personally. I have no idea.
You wouldn't side with the medical experts who say it's dangerous nonsense?
I wouldn't. When it comes to science, I don't side with anybody.
Well, you know, they can't both be right. And yes, to my original question, the truth thing does matter. The exchanges between Farage and Ferrari were prompted originally by the Donald Trump allegation that migrants from Haiti were eating pet cats and dogs in the town of Springfield, Ohio. And I'm joined now in the studio by our political correspondent, Aggie Chambre, to give us her reaction to the Reform leader's comments this morning. Aggie, thank you very much indeed for joining me. It does seem that we're getting a kind of splashback from the way that Trump treats these moments. I mean, for him, it's a way of getting attention. The truth doesn't matter very much as long as he gets noticed. But I think it's quite dangerous to import this into British politics. I'm not sure that Nigel Farage is doing the right thing from his own point of view here.
I think that's a really interesting point. And actually, I was looking at what Luke Trill, the pollster, was saying earlier about this. And he was basically saying that he thinks something odd is going on in the strategic choices that Reform have made in the past few weeks. And basically said, look, this is out of line with British public opinion. Those comments that you just heard there about paracetamol, he said it's politically damaging for two key reasons. One, Brits trust science. And two, they don't like Trump. And on that second point, I think the stats are 70% of Brits do not like Trump. It's not even that they're neutral, they do not like Trump. So Nigel Farage refusing, or not going very far into criticising Donald Trump, I'm not sure how effective that will be as a long-term strategy.
And the bigger picture here, Aggie, because we also had this huge deportation announcement at the beginning of the week, is that I'm beginning to wonder whether the assumption that if Labour kind of stumbles, if something goes wrong and we snap our fingers and there's an election, it's a Reform government for sure. Is that necessarily right? Or are we seeing Reform beginning to make some big mistakes?
I think what Labour have done in the last few weeks and months has been a reaction to that exact point. The point that they believe that if Keir Starmer makes a misstep over the next 3 years, then it will be Nigel Farage who takes over. And I think that's where a lot of the slightly strange briefings, a lot of the strange sort of narrative about whether Keir Starmer actually can survive very much longer has actually come from that backdrop. And I think if that changes, and as you say, maybe Nigel Farage has made a few missteps in the last last few weeks. And actually worth pointing out that I think their polling last week did go down 3 points. Labour's actually went up 3 points. Whether that could change the entire context.
I kind of think that conversation that Nigel Farage had with Nick Ferrari is going to help Labour quite a lot at a party conference. I think a lot of the rhetoric from the party conference will be aiming at Farage, aiming at reform, aiming at Tommy Robinson as well. And this is all going to help them.
But it's a difficult dance, isn't it? Because Keir Starmer still doesn't want to criticise Donald Trump at all. I mean, we saw all the pomp
That's a very good point.
and pageantry
that is a very
last
good
week.
point, yeah.
I don't think Keir Starmer, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he's responded to those comments about paracetamol, about Tylenol from Donald Trump. And presumably people are going to ask that question.
Interestingly, Wes Streeting has. He's absolutely gone for it today.
On and on. And actually, he went for it yesterday. He's gone for it today as well with the Nigel Farage comments in reacting to Donald Trump. And I think you are starting to see ministers slightly be more critical of Donald Trump. Pat McFadden and Bridget Phillipson today, but not quite on the levels that we've seen from the Health Secretary.
Now, Aggie, we have been chewing some enjoyable cud, but you're really here because you have got a really interesting scoop of your own, and it's about the Arts Council.
It is indeed. So, Andrew, I understand that mayors could be given sweeping new powers to dish out millions of pounds worth of funding of the arts. So, at the moment, the Arts Council distributes hundreds of millions of pounds, £548 million worth of government money to theatres, to individuals, to arts organisations. And basically, Margaret Hodge, Labour veteran peer, Margaret Hodge, is doing this review. She's in quite early stages of the review, but what I understand is likely to come out of that is actually that the funding powers are taken away from the Art Council and handed to mayors, devolved. And basically, I think part of the reason why is the government, well, we know they don't really like arm's length bodies. We've seen that with NHS England.
I was going to say, is this the next humane killer? You know, they've used it bang against NHS England. Now it's bang the Arts Council.
Well, I think so. I think it honestly was floated in the department of whether or not they should just scrap entirely the Arts Council. But somebody said to me that would just be a bit of a nightmare. The bureaucracy, DCMS is quite a small department. That might just be too difficult. But I think it is likely at the beginning of next year, when this review concludes, that actually we come to a situation where the Arts Council is basically gutted, and it does still have a role nationally, but does not have the funding powers that it has at the moment. And I think part of it too is the government feels that this arm's length body is getting the praise for dishing out all of this money. And actually the government says, well, hang on, it's actually us.
So if it went to directly elected mayors and local councils instead, that would be a very, very big deal in the arts world. That would mean that the local theatre, the local opera house, whatever it might be, would have a much more direct connection with the elected body in front of it.
I think that's right. And I think, we are still in the early stages. Baroness Hodge, I don't think, has actually written her recommendations yet, but this could have a huge impact. And I think it's all about that thing that government keeps going back to again and again, and that thing that they feel that at the moment is potentially not fair. And they want to reinstigate fairness within the arts world as well as other places. And I think this is one of the ways that they could do it. But I should just read a DCMS spokesperson said, "We strongly believe in the importance of the arts being accessible right across the country. Arts Council England is a core part of how we deliver that. The independent review is an opportunity to ensure it successfully champions our cultural and creative sectors in every part of England."
Well, it's also quite important, this story, even leaving aside the actual subject, which is the arts, which are very, very important. And by the way, I think quite a lot of arts organisations would really, really welcome getting the Arts Council off their backs because they've been so involved. But it's also really about the notion that Labour is still in a position where it feels that it can reform and change things at the centre, that it hasn't given up making some big choices.
I think that's true. And also I think it's interesting that they commissioned so many reviews. So I think it's interesting that actually when I was speaking to people, it sounded like the position that they wanted to get to was actually to get to this position where the money was being devolved, it was being handed to mayors, to local councils, as you say. But does a review to get to that point, which I think we've seen with this Labour government again and again and again.
It does like process. It loves a bit of process. Aggie, it's always a delight to talk. Thank you very much indeed for that. Now, coming up, Jaguar Land Rover's shutdown has been extended after a huge cyber attack. We're going to talk to a cyber expert and an MP whose constituents are being affected by it. But the time now, 6:30, and Dominic Ellis has news headlines.
Pressure is building on Nigel Farage to row back on his comments about paracetamol on LBC. The Reform UK leader has told us he has no idea if Donald Trump's discredited claims about a link with autism is true. The Health Secretary says the remarks are anti-science and has accused Nigel Farage of having no backbone. The Deputy Prime Minister of Poland has told LBC that his country will do whatever's necessary to defend itself in the face of Russian provocation. Radosław Sikorski has told Tonight with Andrew Marr that Moscow is probing European responses by sending warplanes into NATO airspace. And a small child is among a family of 3 to be the first people to arrive in the UK under the one-in, one-out deal with France. 4 migrants have been returned to Calais as part of the agreement designed to stop small boat crossings. LBC weather: a clear and dry evening for most, some patchy fog developing in the north and west, lows of 8 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
With Ed Davey warning voters not to let Trump's America become Farage's Britain, we're asking whether Donald Trump has become the dividing line, not in America, but in British politics. Listen now on our free Global Player app.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
I'd been in the family home for 30 years, but it was different. Too many rooms, too few voices.
BBC.
6:33. Let's talk about Jaguar Land Rover hit by an absolutely devastating cyber attack. It's the proud remnant of our car industry, and the Prime Minister Keir Starmer sees JLR as a sophisticated, prestigious firm critical to the future of British manufacturing. But this cyber attack, which began at the beginning of the month and will carry on until October, is the worst cyber attack in the history of British business. It's causing huge anguish. Let's start by talking to Ciaran Martin, the Oxford professor and former head of cybersecurity at the National Cybersecurity Centre. Ciaran, very, very good to have you on the show. I think the fundamental question I have is, how can it be that a cyber attack can close down such a huge manufacturing firm as JLR for an entire month?
That's a very good question, and the details have been pretty slow to emerge. In classic manufacturing or in heavy plant like energy grids and so forth, there's this distinction between what we would normally call IT, the sort of technology we're using now, the sorts that we all use for invoicing, for emailing and so forth, and then what you call operational technology, the big heavy plant machinery that runs pipelines, energy plants, and indeed manufacturing. And there are dependencies between them. Sometimes hackers try to jump, they get into the IT and they try to jump onto the operational technology. That doesn't seem to be the case here. What seems to be the case here is one of two things. One is just the ordinary IT so badly affected that they are unable to run the operation of the factory, so they have to shut them down. The other is they're worried about contagion. So initially, when this hack happened, as you said, at the start of the month, Andrew, the first statement from Jaguar Land Rover said they proactively had to shut down things because they were worried about being unable to control it. Then the question is, why does it take so long to get back? And you're right, this is one of the most serious incidents just because of the impact of it closing down all these factories, not just here in the UK, but in Eastern Europe and India, Brazil, and so forth, is that this type of malware, to use the jargon, does batter the computer network. So it takes a while to recover. Now, normally it's a little bit more contained. Even we had a very serious attack on hospital IT. Even
I remember that, yes.
In London last June. But it was relatively narrow in its impact. It was tended to be at just one trust, albeit one of the biggest trusts in the country. But you can sort of contain that. Here, it seems to have been a very, very wide impact. So the 2 to 3 months where it takes to recover are really, really hurting not just the company, but all the companies that depend on it.
30,000 jobs inside JLR and about 100,000, I think, beyond JLR, just in the UK. So that is huge. Let me tiptoe, because we don't know at all who's responsible for this, but tiptoe into the possibilities there, because JLR was also the company that famously Keir Starmer saved from the American tariffs earlier in the year. And he made a big deal about how important Jaguar Land Rover was to the British economy and to all of our futures and to our exporting potential, and what a big deal it was that he had got it out of the Trump tariff trap. I wonder whether that would therefore, if the Russians were looking for a big British target to give us a miserable time, that would make it a fairly obvious one, wouldn't it?
So tiptoeing is the right word, because we have to be pretty careful before we start making very serious accusations. And the technical evidence that often gets out by this stage of an attack just really isn't there. So what we're going on, we're not going on much. We're going kind of on two things, neither of which on the current evidence, and the current very flimsy evidence, would suggest Russia or any other nation state. So the first sort of batch of evidence is essentially what sort of things like this have happened before. And there have been attacks on manufacturers in France, in North America, all over the sort of rich world, if you like, and they've tended to be criminal. They've tended to try and lock out these organizations in order to extort money out of them to let them back in. There's relatively scant history of Russia doing that outside of Ukraine in the recent past. So the sort of hallmarks, such as they are of criminal activity. Secondly, then, and you think back to Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op and so forth, there's this weird group of English-speaking, disparate group, because these are all disparate groups. I mean, they're criminals, so they don't have membership lists, and we can't tell who they are. But there's this weird group going by various names. Some are called this sort of super group called the COM. There's Scattered Spider is this ridiculous code name that the Marks and Spencer's hackers gave themselves. Of course, 4 alleged members of that group have been arrested. They were all British, so a lot of this cybercrime tends to come from Russia, not from the Russian state, but from within Russia. The people arrested, not yet charged in relation to the M&S hack, using the moniker Scattered Spider, are all Brits. And then there's this sort of weird statement by a group saying we're a combination of a Scattered Spider, another group calling themselves Lapsus and so forth, saying we're behind Jaguar Land Rover. So some criminals are trying to claim this. It bears the hallmark of criminality, and there's no evidence yet to link the Russian state. I think the worry, though, Andrew, strategically, I mean, this is an awful case in and of itself, but the national security worry is that this is well within the capabilities of Russia to do. I mean, if this is a group of organized criminals, think what an organized nation state with real capabilities could do.
Well, if I was Vladimir Putin observing this, even if this is just, if this is a criminal extortion gang working on it, and I looked at the huge amount of disruption and misery this is causing, a key part of the British public life, really, I think, well, actually, that's quite a good idea.
I think that must be a strategic worry that is on the mind of my former colleagues in the intelligence and security services, and hopefully as well as the National Security Council. This single incident is so serious that it's a matter of economic security. I mean, some people are saying it's genuinely a matter of economic security in its own right. The national security issue is the exposure of vulnerabilities. Think about all of this happening at a larger scale to loads of companies at once. And one of the challenges, you have to learn from these things. People act normally in government and in the private sector with good intentions, but you learn from things. So we have a pattern and a habit of regulating what we call critical infrastructure, the energy sector, the finance sector, and so forth. Jaguar Land Rover is an important company, but it's not critical infrastructure. It makes cars, and there are other. It's not regarded as an essential service. But if you think about the large scale vulnerability to bring loads of companies to their knees in this way at the same time, that's a national security vulnerability. vulnerability in aggregate. So I think we're going to have to think a lot harder about how to build in some form of resilience and better cyber defenses. There's a whole set of issues in M&S and Jaguar Land Rover and so forth about supply chains, not so much in the impact, but in the way in which complicated IT supply chains can lead to vulnerabilities that we really need to look at.
And a simple souls question, Ciaran. AI, does that make these attacks more lethal, more harder to destabilize, harder to protect ourselves against?
Not especially yet. I mean, we have to keep watch, and it's more sort of attritional. It hasn't created any magic new weapons. I think on one side of the ledger, on the bad side of the ledger, what AI does is it makes it a bit cheaper and therefore easier for more people to do it. It makes the tools a bit easier to use. It makes, for example, some of those spoof emails that are often a way in these attacks, a bit more credible. On the other hand, you can use the same tools to enhance detection and so forth. So I don't think, we've enough to worry about with the IT we already have, as we've seen from this event and from a whole series, going back to the NHS attack, going back to the Marks and Spencers and Co-op attacks. Now JLR, we hit the problems at the airports at the weekend. We have enough problems with the tech we're already using without panicking about AI, because it can help defences as well as help attackers.
Well, it is an enormous story and one we are going to hear more and more about, I'm sure. But for now, Ciaran Martin, thank you very, very much for talking to LBC. And apart from all of those working directly for the car maker, as I was saying, there may be around 100,000 other jobs in the supply chain feeding JLR with parts. The Unite Union warns that thousands of jobs are under immediate threat. And one of the MPs representing a constituency facing this threat is Dr. Neil Shastri-Hurst, the MP for Solihull West, and Shirley, who joins me now. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Shastri-Hurst, for joining me. Your constituency has companies that supply JLR, yes? Tell me a little bit about what's happening inside the community, what's happening to some of these firms.
This is an incredibly complex and stressful situation for many of my constituents, as you've touched upon earlier with your previous interviewee. 36,000 people employed by Jaguar Land Rover, more than 100,000 in the supply chain. And it's the supply chain that I'm particularly worried about at the moment, because many of those are smaller businesses who are particularly vulnerable to not getting the money flow through, the cash flow through in these scenarios. And what we're hearing is, many of my colleagues have been up and down the country, and I must stress that JLR have been incredibly good at communicating with us and keeping us up to date on how they're progressing. But what we're seeing is that more and more of these smaller organisations, part of that crucial supply chain that bring in part of that £18 billion to the UK GDP, are struggling. And I think that's where the government needs to be providing more support. I think there has been a lacuna from the government in terms of what they have said, and words at this point in time are not enough. They need to do some concrete things. And I think the most obvious way is the Department of Business and Trade, along with the Treasury and UK banks, looking at providing short-term, fully repayable loans to some of these, as I say, the SME type sector within the supply chain, in order to ensure that they can get through these incredibly challenging situations.
Mr. Shastri-Hurst, I've heard a report which suggests that the government is looking at actually buying up a lot of the components produced by the firms in your constituency and elsewhere, and, as it were, holding on to them and then passing them back to Jaguar Land Rover when Jaguar Land Rover gets going again. In other words, acting as a kind of middleman. That seems more likely than, for instance, going full furlough, going full, as it were, pandemic mode and protecting everybody's jobs.
I'm not suggesting we should go into a full furlough mode at the moment. As I say, I'm putting forward a suggestion, as I have with several other West Midlands MPs, around a short-term loan that would be fully repayable. There are other ways that can be done, but we need to step in, and we need to step in quickly as a government, or the government needs to be stepping in order to protect these organisations who are, they're worried there, and they're important contributors to both the local and the national economy.
And have you had any conversations yet, any reassurances from the Business Secretary or any other ministers? Have you talked to the Treasury at all?
We have written, as I say, a joint letter to Peter Kyle, the business secretary. We've yet to receive a response, and to date, I have to say, lots of warm words, but it's the concrete decisions and support that is going to be so critical to these organisations. They don't need platitudes from politicians. What they need is concrete solutions.
So the message is clear. Pull your fingers out and get going. Mr. Shastri-Hurst, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. Now, in a few minutes, I'm going to be speaking to a YouTuber with nearly 7 million subscribers to ask if her profession is now taken seriously enough, given the billions they are bringing to our economy. The time now, 6:46.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
I'm beginning to wonder if Nigel Farage and Reform UK might have peaked. So have we seen peak reform, or is my political antenna way off beam?
Ian Dale on LBC. Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:48. 5 years ago, the think tank Labour Together, which backed Keir Starmer for the leadership and was led in those days by his Chief of Staff Morgan McSweeney, failed to properly declare more than £700,000 of donations. A year later, the Electoral Commission fined it £14,000 for 20 breaches of the rules. And now, a letter's emerged from the Labour peer and legal advisor to Labour, Gerald Shamash, advising McSweeney to describe the undeclared donations as an admin error. Let's talk now to Vijay Rangarajan of the Electoral Commission. Were they going to reopen the inquiry?
Well, we did a really thorough inquiry into the Labour Together. And so what we've got now is a team looking at that inquiry and looking at the new evidence, which Mr. Hollingwick sent us, and seeing does that change anything in what happened at the time. It was a pretty thorough inquiry, and Labour Together cooperated fully as far as we were aware at the time. And they had done something wrong. They hadn't declared some of these donations correctly. So we find them near the top of what we can find a political party. So what we're doing is looking back at all those files and saying, did they change their minds on anything?
I suppose the key question is whether Morgan McSweeney and his colleagues there were acting with transparency and candour towards you at the time.
Exactly. At the moment, it looks as if Gerald Shamash's advice is that they should. And as far as we're aware now, they did, and that's what we said in our report, and we then fined them because they had made a significant error. And there was no good reason why they'd made that error. Sometimes when people are ill, for example, we've got a small party who isn't necessarily quite up to speed, we'll give them some leeway, we'll be proportionate in what we do. But we fine them a lot at that point.
It feels like a little bit more than an admin error.
It's definitely an error. They didn't get right that they were a members' association and hence caught by electoral law, and they should have done.
How long do you think it would be before you know whether you're going to launch another investigation or inquiry, and then how long would that take?
We should have an outcome to this initial review by Friday this week, so that's 2 days' time. And then, if we're doing a full investigation, we'll be writing to all the various parties involved, reassembling the evidence, and that can take some weeks or months.
In your gut, is this a hanging matter?
I don't know yet, because I'd like to wait on the full review before we really do this. We're talking here about some quite serious offences, so we'll do a thorough investigation, and this review is the first part of it.
All right. Vijay, let me ask you about a few other things on your plate, because you've got a lot on your plate. One of the big issues, I guess, is the extension of the voting age down to 16. So 16 and 17-year-olds will get the vote. What does that mean for the Electoral Commission? What are the problems that brings?
First of all, I think we can learn a lot from what happened in Wales and Scotland, who obviously had this going for quite a long time. One of the real lessons there is that young people want to know more about politics.
And you've done some research on this, or commissioned some anyway.
We have, and we've done Young Voices in Democracy. We've published all this, so anyone interested can read it online. About 3/4 of young people want to know more. So what we think we need to do as the Electoral Commission is help teachers, help parents, and help young people themselves learn more about politics. The appetite is clearly there. That has to happen in several places. So we've put in some significant evidence to the curriculum review for England and Wales, so for England, in order to amend the citizenship curriculum. And we're working really closely with the Association of Citizenship Teachers and many other partners to try to develop really impartial material for young people.
Politicians of all parties have traditionally shied away a bit from going into schools. Does this mean that actually they should stop shying away and they should get into schools and talk to school children?
So some politicians do a lot of going into schools and really enjoy it. And you're obviously right, others don't. We think not just politicians, but candidates in general should be going into schools, should be engaging with young people. And young people, in return, should be able to probe them, should have a really robust but respectful debate with those candidates on their views. The whole point of this is to put young people in a place to make their own minds up. And that also means that schools need to tackle digital literacy. So where do you get your information from? Our research is showing most young people are getting it online and parts of social media.
Some of it true, some of it not true.
Quite a bit of it not true. And 66% of it coming from TikTok is what they tell us. So where do you get information from? How to be, appropriately cautious about believing everything you read online.
Now, we're talking on the show today about the huge cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover. But you, as part of, many people would see, as part of the national infrastructure, the electoral system you oversee, very important to us as a nation, as a country. You also suffered a very big, very sophisticated cyber attack back in 2022. What lessons have you learned from that?
Well, we've had to do a big recovery operation since 2022. The government attributed this to various Chinese bodies which tried and successfully tried to penetrate some of our servers. We then changed radically our security, and we've now got to the highest levels of cyber defense called Cyber Essentials Plus. It cost a lot of money, took a lot of time to recover from it. Our lesson is that you have to keep up really with the very best cyber defences we have, because we're still coming under massive attack. We had 2 massive denial of service attacks on the day the last general election was called, and over 60,000 cyber attacks hit us on the day of the general election.
So this
successfully blocked, by the way.
This is malign actors trying to screw up our electoral system.
Yes, I think it's definitely malign actors. They're trying to screw the electoral system. They obviously could have, had they been successful, which they weren't, the effect of denying a lot of people the vote. They're trying to sow dissent and mistrust in the outcomes of the electoral system, something that a lot of electoral commissions around the world discuss and try to protect against. I think some of them are also out for the sort of ransomware and financial gain that they can get out of it.
Are they stealing details from the electoral roll as well?
They had some access to a research copy of the Electoral Roll in 2022, as we said, but it wasn't anything which made public. It was parts of the open register.
Stuff they could have got anywhere else, yes.
Yeah, but we've got to be very careful that future cyber attacks don't get anywhere near the more sensitive information that does exist. And so we're trying to work with all of the political parties and others who have access to the roll to strengthen our overall cyber defences on this.
And so when it comes to the younger voters, you are going to actually approach them. You've got a big event, I think, in March?
We do. So Welcome to Your Vote Week is in March 2026. Last year, we contacted about 500,000 young voters. We're going to try to scale that up significantly. And all these impartial education resources we're going to be producing will be road testing with schools and young people over the course of the next year.
Maybe try and get a few of them on the show at the time. Vijay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, for a crumbling old git like me, here is a really astonishing story. content creators on YouTube are apparently worth £2.2 billion to the UK economy, and now they have their own all-party parliamentary group. Let's talk now to Lilly Sabri, a fitness content creator with a whopping 6.5 million followers on YouTube. And I'm really, really sorry, Lilly, but I'm going to start with the very, very basics. Content creators are what we used to call influencers. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, there is an overlap, and I think depending on who you're speaking to, there will be potentially judgments around the word that is used. But content creators typically will sit on YouTube versus other social media platforms.
All right. Just imagine a sort of crumbling old character in a kind of cardigan that's falling apart and a pair of slippers sitting at home trying to work out what a content creator actually is. Just explain it to him.
Yeah, so I think it's best to probably use myself as an example. Yes. I have a background actually as a physiotherapist. I realised that I could only see a certain amount of patients per day. I realised I only had one pair of hands and I wanted to reach the masses and help more people. So I took my skills online, which was teaching Pilates initially and other different workouts. It involves the creation of content, and content can be anything from entertainment through to education.
So you're really like a one-person broadcaster?
Yes. However, yes, but the team behind me, as you will know as well, is absolutely
We've always got
massive.
A big team. I've got a big team behind me looking through the mirror there.
Yeah.
And this is an astonishing figure. £2.2 billion makes this a big industry in UK terms. So where does the money actually come? How does the money come in?
Yeah, so it's coming in from multiple streams. YouTube is a very unique platform in that it provides its content creators with ad revenue, an opportunity to earn ad revenue, which means you have a CTM, so you're paid per the amount of views that you receive from YouTube, and it's also determined by where the views are coming from. So you're earning ad revenue. On top of that, you have content creators like me who may have set up their own businesses. So obviously that's contributing to the economy, whether it's employing staff, in my case, manufacturing costs, different factories around the UK, distribution centres. The list is endless. So
we've gone an awful long way from the sort of prejudicial view of people dancing around in Regent's Park with umbrellas. So it's a massive change.
Yeah.
And presumably you would say an awful lot of the content is actually important, it's educational, it's driving other businesses.
Yeah, precisely. I think that's something where, again, people can misunderstand the industry. I describe it as a scale. You can be providing something as far as comedy and entertainment all the way through to education, even politics. You know, there is content creation in absolutely every single field. I say that I tend to sit closer to the middle, but I'm definitely providing a service in that it's education as a physiotherapist, workouts to follow along at home. But there's an element of entertainment as well. I'm hopefully allowing people to enjoy movement and wellness.
I'm sure you are. How important is it to have, as it were, political recognition? Because an all-parliamentary group is all-party parliamentary group is quite a thing.
Yeah, I would say it's a fast-evolving industry. If you were to speak to some of my family, I mean, as I said, I trained as a physiotherapist. We've got doctors, lawyers in the family. Initially, when I said I was taking things online, they nearly fell off their chair. And I think it's something that is here to stay. It's been questioned if it's a real job and if it's a fad. And I've now been in the industry for 10 years and it's very much here to stay. I've built a sustainable career, employed many people off the back of it. I believe that Parliament are starting to recognise that, and recognition is the most important thing, because the more open the communication is, the more we can earn for the economy together.
Well, this is absolutely fascinating. Way, way back in time, there was a time where if you were slightly exhibitionist or, you know, enjoyed the sound of your own voice and felt you had a few things to tell the rest of the world, you ended up as a radio host.
Yes.
And now the world has moved on. Thank you very, very much for coming in and explaining the future to me. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you want. You can pause, you can rewind, live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
What a calumny to say that radio hosts like the sound of their own voices, Andrew. Honestly. Now, here's a thought. I'm beginning to wonder if Nigel Farage and Reform UK might have peaked. since their conference, they seem to have gone, well, a little bit bonkers. And I think many people who are considering voting for them have been put off by some of the strange things they've been saying or doing. So have we had peak